We're now 4 weeks into Yellowstone's first spin-off, and with the series now officially renewed for another season, it seems like the show is wrapping up its setup phase and settling into its new identity. That's precisely what we got in The Gathering Storm, as dueling plotlines gave several members of the team a chance to develop in more rounded ways. Whether or not the characters will choose to follow through on them all remains to be seen. Here's what you missed on this week's episode. The primary plot of this week was divided among two cases. On one side, Harry, the head of the Marshals office, tasks most of the team with an investigation into one of their own, Kayce, of course. It seems that Clegg, the potential season big bad who was introduced last week, has filed a complaint with the Department of Justice saying that his son was actually unarmed when Kayce shot him in episode 3. As such, Kayce is benched. This will last approximately 30 seconds, while Andrea leads Belle and Miles in their own investigation of the shooting to try and get out in front of the DOJ inquiry. The team feels openly conflicted about this, with Belle and Miles clearly on Kayce's side, while Andrea is in the awkward position of having to choose her loyalties. Harry wants her to dig up some reason to kick Kayce off of the team before the DOJ uncovers any Dutton family skeletons, not quite going so far as telling her to manufacture evidence, but implying heavily that her ability to get rid of Kayce could result in her much hoped-for transfer back to her old team in DC. There's, frankly, a lot of runaround in this plotline as the team tries variously to track down any motive Kayce would have to kill Clegg's son. Clegg threatens to go to the press, an old Yellowstone plotline involving Tate's kidnapping is discussed, and Harry attempts to railroad Kayce on some very thin evidence, all of which I'm just going to hand-wave away for the moment as it ends up feeling like much ado about nothing. In the end, when the team manages to turn up some trail cameras that recorded a video proving that Kayce was in the right all along, convenient. Kayce's badge is saved. The team all feel bad for investigating him, even though it was literally their jobs. Harry is pissed off at Andrea, but Andrea feels the same way and warns him never to manipulate her like that again. On the other side of this week's plot are Kayce and Cal, who, truly 30 seconds after Harry tells Kayce he can't work cases, head out on a search and rescue operation with the Rangers. A rich local landowner and his helicopter pilot have disappeared amidst high winds and dangerous weather. The guys head out on horseback to search part of the grid. In case you were worried that the helicopter might have crashed in any other sector, don't, and also for some good old manly bonding time, amidst discussions about Kayce's issues with rich guys who buy lots of ranch land and acting like king of the valley, daddy issues, whether Kayce killing Clegg's son was justified, and another lecture about Kayce not making friends with the team. They manage to get held at gunpoint by a scruffy man who's living off the grid in the middle of the woods. Scruffy man is no match for Kayce, naturally, but the guys don't have time to deal with him because they can see the smoke from where the helicopter crashed, so they tell him to go to the ranger station and turn himself in, likely. At the crash site, they find the rich rancher, Tom Weaver, injured, and his pilot near death. The weather is getting worse, so they're going to have to attempt to get both parties back to the ranger station by horseback, only no, actually, they won't because, to quote my notes, oh, dip. A bear. Despite how dramatic that seems, the bear is scared off in short order, though not before jostling the helicopter enough to exacerbate the pilot's injuries, resulting in the death. Kayce blames Weaver for having them out surveying land in the weather, but Weaver clearly feels guilty and they have a long talk about living in their fathers as shadows, so Kayce forgives him. Daddy issues again. Calvin and Miles manage to get Weaver out safely, though not before Scruffy Man returns, shocking, to steal their supplies and try to shoot them. Kayce goes to visit Weaver in the hospital afterwards, where he provides him with some handy ranching information. Weaver insists on lending him some ranch hands as repayment for saving his life, and Weaver's beautiful blonde daughter, Dolly, visibly contemplates NSFW ways she could also show her gratitude, having apparently taken Cal's nagging about. Hanging out with the team to heart, Kayce joins them all at the bar, with Dolly. As Andrea says, I know what grateful looks like, and that's not how she's eyeing you. Saddle up, cowboy. In the final moments of the episode, Dolly corners Kayce up, gently teasing him about being introverted, and tries to cajole him into showing her what Montana has to offer. Kayce says, maybe. For the second week in a row, there's no Tate in the episode. there are a few fun character details in this episode that don't quite come to anything, but might be seeds for the future, including, Andrea went to law school, though she didn't graduate, Belle plays golf, and gambles on it, Miles ghosted a woman who, also goes to their bar. Okay, not so much for Miles this episode. Easily the most interesting side tidbit of the episode came toward the end when Calvin reveals that Maddie, the bartender he's seemingly been trying to win over all season, is, in fact, his daughter. He took the placement on the team to be closer to her, but now she doesn't want anything to do with him because, well, he was a crappy father for 20 years. Fair enough that I realize this is entirely beside the point of the series, but the show keeps bringing it up and forcing me to think about it. Kayce says he has 300 pairs, that's 300 cows with calves, for those who weren't raised in cattle country. Weaver says he's going to lend Kayce some ranch hands to deal with said cattle. Kayce has previously said that Rip also got his some ranch hands. So where the heck are these ranch hands? Why are they never around? Why is this show forcing me to think about animal husbandry when it clearly just wants to run around the woods and shoot guns? The Yellowstone might be gone, but there's still some landmines left behind, Kayce Dutton, Luke Grimes, says toward the end of Marshall's second episode, in what feels certain to be a prophecy for the spin-off's future. If last week's series premiere was starting a new chapter, this week's episode is all about the things we can't leave behind. From characters haunted by regret, to those yearning to return to the past, to a quandary about where the bodies are buried, literally, the chickens are really coming home to roost in the second outing of Marshals. Having joined the U.S. Marshals team in the series premiere, this week kicks off with a new status quo. Kayce is ready for a fresh outlook as he begins his first official day on the job. We get a brief name check of Rip Wheeler, the enigmatic ranch hand from Yellowstone who ultimately married Kayce's sister, Beth. Don't worry, their spin-off is still slated for some time later this year, who has found some guys to deal with the day-to-day ranching tasks that Kayce will now be too busy to do. It's only the first echo of Yellowstone that we'll get in this episode full of harkening back, but it's one that's sure to give fans of the original series a thrill. Kayce gets the tour Marshals HQ, a suspiciously stylish converted mill that has only a single restroom, despite the fact that at least a dozen people work there. Don't worry, most of those characters have desk jobs and no names, so they probably don't use the bathroom either. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Kayce is being treated as the new guy, given that a training wheels jobs. Perhaps even less surprisingly, Kayce is not pleased by this turn of events. Harry, who might be better served by wearing a pin that says, "I'm the boss," instead of having to constantly remind people, still doesn't approve of Kayce joining the team. Despite a general loyalty we're meant to feel for the Duttons, it's hard not to see his point. You don't find it odd that he's jumping back into law enforcement when the two biggest cold cases in the state are his father's death and his brother's disappearance. Harry asks team leader Pete Calvin. Calvin, who also happens to be Kayce's former SEAL team leader, insists that's merely a coincidence. There's no such things as a coincidence with the Duttons, Harry says. Oh buddy, you don't know the half of it. This week's case starts off straightforwardly enough, as the team kicks in a few doors and arrests two men, one a cartel member, the other, part of the Aryan Brotherhood. The odd couple pairing gets the team's attention and eventually, they, Andrea, manage to determine that there's a big drug deal going down between the opposing gangs that very day. The short time frame means that the team will have to handle the takedown by themselves in a place that will be very familiar to fans of the Duttonverse, the Zone of Death, known in Yellowstone as the train station, and first introduced under its ominous official name in the prequel 1923, the Zone of Death is a secret spot, based on a real location at the Wyoming/Montana border where the lack of legal jurisdiction allowed the Duttons to quietly dispose of the bodies of their enemies. Including, by the end of the flagship series, that of Kayce's aforementioned missing brother, Jamie. Cue the dramatic music. The team heads off to take down the cartel deal, but before they leave, Belle's husband and young son pay a surprise visit to HQ. Belle apologizes to Calvin, saying it won't happen again, but he argues that she should let them come, saying if he had been there for his family more, he'd still have them. Belle admits that she's still adjusting to normal life after working undercover for the DEA, and that she hadn't told her husband that she had been shot, in her bulletproof vest, on their previous mission. Calvin warns her about building walls between herself and the people she loves, but she argues, they're not walls, they're shields. Elsewhere, Andrea has clocked that Kayce's feeling weird about the zone of death and not so subtly implies that he knows where Jamie is. As fans of Yellowstone will remember, Jamie is very dead, but as far as most of the characters of Marshals know, he's just on the run after being linked to the murder of his adopted father, John Dutton, which poses a potential problem for Kayce should anyone on the team somehow stumble across his body, or the many others the family has dumped in the zone of death